And do we have all the participants? Have folks joined? Looks like we have quite a crowd here. This is great. So I wish I could see you all. I cannot, so I'm just imagining all your faces. I'm Drew Kane. I'm the land use planner at the Community Development Department and the project manager for the our Cambridge Street planning process. And thanks everyone for taking time on a Thursday evening to talk with us. This is the second workshop we are having this month for our Cambridge Street. The first one was more of a visioning exercise in which we tried to find some common ground and get an idea of some aspirations for Cambridge Street from people and what they wanted it to be, what they loved about it now, what they imagined the future could look like. This workshop, we're digging a little bit deeper into certain topic areas and issues that have arisen through the course of the process. And we'll review all those with you, but just to get sort of set the stage tonight, it'll be more of a conversational. We'll have a brief presentation up front, and then we'll go into breakout rooms. And if Tobin, if you can go to the next slide. So you've probably seen this before, and if you are here at this meeting, then you do know how to use Zoom, but just a few things we wanted to point out. Please stay muted right now. We'll have an opportunity for everyone to talk when we go to breakout rooms, but for now, if you can keep your microphone muted. If you're comfortable and you'd like to leave on the camera, that's great. We'd love to see you, but if you're busy and you're making dinner or, grooming your dog, whatever the case may be, if you want to keep your camera off, that's fine. We will be using the chat feature, but we won't use those until breakout rooms. So if you can refrain from using the chat, there are a couple opportunities prior to breakout rooms, but we will ask you to click on a link and we'll prompt you for those. But for the most part, we're going to keep the chat closed until we get to the breakout rooms as far as public participation is concerned. If you want to raise your hand when we get to the breakout rooms, there's that icon on the right-hand side and you drop down and there's the raise hand function. If you're having any connectivity issues at all, you can call into this meeting. It's 929-436-2866. The meeting ID is 832-2370-1974. And I wanted to point out tonight that closed captioning is available for this meeting. To turn on the closed captioning, you'll go down to the bottom of your screen and hover over the icon that says live transcript. From there, you can click on show subtitle. If you want to see a full streaming transcript, you can click on view full transcript. That'll pop up in a separate box. We also have a separate link that you're able to use for a separate program if you'd like. And Stephanie, who is helping us tonight with the transcription, can put that link in the chat, I believe, for folks.
Yes, I'm putting it in there right now.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie.
It's in. Thank you.
Perfect. And Toby, you can go ahead to the next slide. Great. Yeah. So we want to go over a couple of ground rules for tonight's meeting. We want to hear from as many people as we can tonight. We ask that everyone be respectful of everyone else that's here tonight, to be brief in their comments and questions if we can, because we've got plenty of ground to cover. And these bullets just sort of cover kind of basics of sort of respect of our fellow residents, participants, neighbors during this conversation. So share the air, make space for new voices. If you had the opportunity to talk in prior meetings or in this meeting a good bit, please be aware of other folks that might not have had the chance to talk yet and sort of step back and let them speak. We want to keep our comments succinct because we do have limited time. We want you to share your wisdom and expertise. You guys are all here because you're either neighbors, you're residents, you're business owners, you have some sort of association with Cambridge Street, and you know the area the best. And so that's why we're honoring your wisdom. And we want you to also honor the wisdom of others if you can. Listen to each other, honor different perspectives. It's very critical here because we do want to advance the group process. Part of this is coming to some sort of common ground on how we imagine the future of Cambridge Street. So we want to sort of amplify those points of common ground and make them the focus of our conversation. Next slide. So here's where I'll pause for a second. Ashley has placed in the chat a Google form. This is a quick form just so we know who's here tonight. Enter a little bit of information about yourself, and it helps us in our process too to make sure we're engaging as many people as we can in this process. So I'll just pause for a second while people do that. Okay, Tobin, you can go to the next slide. And a brief overview of the project scope. So once this plan, what is it for? Once this plan is done, what are we going to be using it for? This plan came out of the Envision Cambridge process. In Envision Cambridge, we identify different parts of the city that are going to be seeing different degrees and scales of growth over the coming years. And whether that's more transformational growth like Kendall or Alewife, or stuff that's more sort of subtle and gradual over time, namely in the corridors and squares, such as Cambridge Street. So Cambridge Street is an area where we're looking, what's going to happen 10, 15, 20 years from now, because so much is changing around us in Cambridge and in Somerville. We want to sort of get ahead of the game a little bit and make sure that we're able to lay the groundwork, so to speak, and have a game plan for Cambridge Street. And once this plan's done, it's a document that can be used for coordinating public policy. So if we make recommendations for zoning, how do we then move that forward process into actually writing it? I'm just using that as an example. We want this to be a guide for advocates, for neighborhood associations, for people that are advocates for different causes, to use this as a tool to take action. We want to be able to create partnerships, for example, public-private partnerships, and this used as a roadmap as to how to make that happen for anything on Cambridge Street, and a prioritized investment plan. So what does this look like? Are there capital projects that come out of this process or recommendations for them? Next slide. And our team tonight, we have a whole host of folks tonight here from both the city staff and the consultant team to be working with you guys in the audience. And in this process, it's been the community development department leading the project, but multiple divisions, so many fingers on one hand. And we've also had a lot of support from our friends at Department of Public Works, Traffic, Parking, and Transportation, and support from Council on Aging and Commission for Persons with Disabilities. Our consultant team, this project is being led by Interface Studio, a design and planning firm out of Philadelphia that we've hired to lead this process with us. Nitty-Grit Partners out of Belmont, who are focused on economic strategy and economic development. Consulticon is a real estate and housing expert. They're located in Cambridge, and Bureau Happold, who will focus on mobility and climate change and resilience planning. Bureau Happold works everywhere. They're an international firm, but they've done a lot of work here in Boston and Cambridge as well. And our agenda for this evening, we are going to dive a little bit deeper into topic areas that we've heard a lot of comments about from our public process so far. Those are in economic development, housing, the street itself, and we'll have a brief presentation of all these key considerations for each topic. Then we're going to provide the bulk of the time tonight, about 60 minutes, for a Q&A with our consultants and our city staff. So as I was mentioning earlier, we ask that folks refrain from comment during these presentations. When we get to the breakout room, we'll then allow folks to unmute themselves, to write questions in the chat, and that's more the point of having conversation, or more rather the point at the meeting, which we'll be having conversations. But prior to that, we'll be focused on sort of brief presentations from city staff in these key priority areas. Next slide. A brief project update. We met 2 weeks ago, so we've been sort of synthesizing and analyzing a lot of what came out of that meeting, and we'll be sharing those results in the future. But tonight, this is an opportunity for us to really dig deeper into conversation. So I'll give you a brief overview of the project update. Here we are on the schedule. In early February, we've had 2 meetings this month, rather this is the second of 2 workshops in February. So we're about halfway through the process so far, and we're getting a lot of robust feedback. We're really beginning to hone in on some of the themes and issues that we want to address in the Cambridge Street planning process, and we've got more to go. So more opportunities for community meetings, smaller events, and by the end of the summer is when this project will be wrapping up. If you can go to the next slide, this is just a snapshot that we like to throw up there of the different sort of events we've actually been able to do outside, in which we could meet with folks one-on-one. We've had a series of pop-up events, pop-ins, tagging on to other events that other departments or organizations are putting on. And we're hoping to do more of that this spring when the weather allows and when the pandemic allows. We're looking forward to getting back to that as well. Engagement so far. Here are some of the events that I just mentioned. We've been doing pop-ins at the Volpe Block Party, Miller's River, the Holiday Stroll, different pop-up events. We had a great turnout in December for our first community meeting, which we kind of did more of a deep dive into data and analysis. We had a good showing 2 weeks ago when we started talking about, what is the vision for Cambridge Street and where are we finding common ground in the pursuit for Cambridge Street's future. And in an online survey, we've had a really exceptional turnout, and that'll be going until next Monday, I believe, is when it closes. And this slide is really more for a point of reference. In case you weren't able to attend the meeting in December, this slide, in a very sort of scattered way, I'm not going to try to break it down, but focuses on what Cambridge Street is trying to do. So this is reflective of a lot of the data and analysis and feedback we got. We'd love for you to go back and view that meeting if you'd like. Both meetings that we've had so far virtually, you can get the slides and the video recordings are on our website. So feel free to go back and review that. And now we're going to move on to the key priority stage of the presentation of the meeting tonight. So if you can go to the next slide. The feedback that we've heard so far has really, we sort of synthesized it into a few different topic areas: small business, housing, and what we're calling access and safety for all street users. So in small business, how are we able to best support and retain our small business community? This is really the backbone of Cambridge Street. It's what we have a deep affection and attachment to. So we want to understand how we can preserve, enhance, and find future opportunities for small businesses on Cambridge Street. Pardees Safari, who's the Director of Economic Development, will be presenting. I'll allow them to introduce themselves when the time comes, small businesses. And housing is the second topic area. We want to understand, are there places that make sense for more housing or other uses on Cambridge Street? We hear a lot about, Cambridge is exceptionally expensive. People are being priced out. Is there a way that Cambridge Street can help contribute to providing additional housing, namely affordable housing? So this process will be exploring opportunities, whether or not we can make that a reality. We will also be looking at access and safety for all street users. So how do we accommodate the needs of all the users of Cambridge Street? How do we address the needs of older adults, of school children, of people on bicycles, of people walking, of people loading and unloading to storefronts? And that's a very complicated ballet, so to speak. And so I'm going to turn off here and pass it along to Pardees Safari. And Pardees, if you want to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure, thanks, Drew. Good evening, everyone. I'm Pardees Safari. I'm the Director of Economic Development here at the Community Development Department. And I'll go into a little bit of an overview on small business issues here on Cambridge Street. I'll go to the next slide. So as Drew gave an overview during this process, we've talked to a lot of different stakeholders, and we just wanted to just touch base on what we've heard so far. So from residents around small businesses, they're very passionate about supporting local businesses along the corridor. And many would like to see more restaurants and retailers, but there's also some concern about pricing out some of the neighborhood goods and services that have been longstanding business owners in the community. And many folks have expressed concerns about lab and office space on Cambridge Street. And from businesses, many of the business owners are welcome additional foot traffic that may come in the form of more residents or workers. And many have generally seen that the development on or around Cambridge Street is actually having a positive or potential positive impact in bringing new customers to the area. And so just thinking again about what we've heard so far, we feel that, and many of you expressed that Cambridge Street is has a very diverse and small local business culture, and it's key to the corridor and its feels and how it functions in the community. The street is full of local businesses, but it's not dominated by retailers. There's many service providers as well. The ownership of buildings and businesses patterns have evolved over time, which can lead to opportunities for business turnover. And there's a the limited scale of development on Cambridge Street helps protect some of the protections and concerns about rising prices of commercial spaces and the variety and quality of commercial spaces. So we have unique opportunities on Cambridge Street for old and new buildings. And the high impact development around surrounding Cambridge Street is an opportunity to add some commercial inventory. And as we mentioned in the other slide, hopefully expand the customer base along Cambridge Street for the businesses there.
Hi, my name is Cassie Arno. I'm a planner at the City of Cambridge, and I work mostly on housing preservation and development, and I'm glad to be with you guys tonight. I'm happy to answer questions when we go into the breakout room. I understand housing has been flagged as one of the major priorities of this study. And before we move from this slide to the next, I just want to say that this building is actually an inclusionary housing building that was just completed, and we're in the process of marketing affordable units here. So there's affordable 1s and 2s that are that are available. We're accepting applications now, and anyone that's interested can reach out to me or check our website, or I think there's an info session Monday. Next slide. So from the discussions so far, we've heard from residents that they see housing, and as Drew said, affordable housing in particular, as a specifically urgent need citywide, as well as in this area of the city along Cambridge Street to help support local businesses. They see the need to build higher, but also want to keep it distinct from the really large scale development happening nearby. And then from businesses, they see more development, whether it's new housing or new uses that bring in new workers, as bringing in more customers. So finding ways to increase the amount of housing seems like it can help in both these ways. Next slide. We put together some information just to show what the housing costs are right now. The figures on this chart were largely from the pandemic months and years when rents were not accelerating at the pace that we typically see in Cambridge. And unfortunately, if we were to continue it on through, we're expecting that into this year and beyond, we'll start picking back up and catching up back up to and beyond to where we were before. But even at this 2,300 figure for rent in Wellington Harrington neighborhood, that's obviously well beyond what many low and moderate and families can afford. And we often use a metric of 30% of household income for housing costs. And at that level, you would need to earn, well over 90,000 to affordably afford that apartment. And that's only the median. So there's obviously many units that are priced much more expensively. So the best way to get ahead and address this is to help increase the supply along Cambridge Street and in the surrounding neighborhood. And then the question is, where does this new housing go, and where can we create new opportunities for housing? And that could be over existing storefronts, converting non-residential to residential. It can be looking at sites that are underutilized now that are going to turn over and could be redeveloped as mixed use to include housing, or as 100% residential use. And then there's a variety of tools that we have in the city to encourage both the housing development and then particularly affordable housing development. And I'd be happy to talk through some of that in the breakout sessions coming up. Thanks.
And Kara?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kara Seiderman. I'm in the Environment and Transportation Planning Division at Community Development. As Drew sort of highlighted, when we think about the users of Cambridge Street, we really want to think about people of all ages and abilities, no matter how they choose to get around. Next slide. A common theme that we heard through the process is the desire for a safe and comfortable environment with a particular emphasis on the walking experience. People would like to see more trees, enhanced outdoor dining, and additional public gathering spaces. Top priorities for residents, both for those who travel to and travel along Cambridge Street, included safety for people bicycling, a positive environment for people walking, and improvements for those taking transit. Top priorities for business include the public space elements of the street, a focus for how people can access them, particularly people walking. Also things like outdoor dining, decorative elements, such as like murals or holiday lights, public spaces, trees, sidewalks, and also about curb access for their operational needs, parking and loading. So we all know, by the way, I'll fess up, I'm also an East Cambridge resident and I use Cambridge Street myself all the time. It's an important corridor and public space. There's many different users and many different uses. And so when we think about the street, we think about traveling on it, but we also think about the staying activities, being there and experiencing the street itself. So the goals of safety and comfort, and when we talk about thinking about what is good for people of all ages and abilities, that means, can somebody who's walking not just walk down the street on a safe and smooth sidewalk, no matter what their physical abilities are, but also can they cross the street where they need to in a manner that's safe and comfortable, so that if they are seeing across the street that there's a nice cafe that they want to go to, or something that they want to buy, it's easy for them to do that. By the same token, somebody who is taking a bus, is there a place for them to wait for the bus? Is there a place for them to easily get on and off the bus? Somebody who's bicycling, we think about people, again, no matter what their age is, or the kids who are going to the school, to the Cambridge Street Upper School, the King Open School, can they get there safely? Is it comfortable for them? Is it comfortable for parents who are traveling with their kids? And if you do need to park, is it clear where you're going to do that? Is it clear where you're going to drop off? So all of these operational things are important for the safety and for the comfort, but again, just emphasizing the street as a public space, and it's not just the practical needs, but the more community needs. And I really love this photo because it sort of encapsulates the kinds of things that we've heard and the kinds of things that can make Cambridge Street really a nice space. Here you're seeing something that feels inviting. It's inviting. There's nice trees. There's businesses that have put out additional greenery. There's a pedestrian-oriented little sign that sort of entices you in. Oh, I wonder, well, look, that sign is saying there's something here for me. What's it saying? It sounds like it's something that might be interesting to me. There's a nice canopy. There's elements such as trash cans, there's bicycle parking, and there's these nice seasonal flowers. I think that the East Cambridge Business Association was involved in. And those kind of elements all help to create a space that you want to be in and that it's inviting to be in. And so that's when we think about the street. It's, again, not just a functional space, but it's a place to be. And in terms of the elements that are important, we just talked about a lot of these. We also have goals that we're trying to think about and how the street design can help to meet the goals that we have to address community health and sustainability, climate change, and elements such as supporting sustainable transportation and providing greenery, additional greenery can help to address those. There are, of course, a lot of considerations to make sure that our local businesses can thrive. And so thinking about on a block by block basis, what the operational needs of the businesses are important elements to how can we support that with loading zones or other kinds of needs. One thing I wanted to just re-emphasize, which I think was laid out well by Drew at the beginning, is that we are setting a framework for a future redesign of the street. We're not, as part of this process, actually doing that redesign, but we want to hear from people about your general needs and also anything that's specific about particular locations, so that when that opportunity comes, and it will come at some point in the future to make changes, that those changes are things that are supported by what we hear through this process and meet the goals that we've identified, and make this a street that really represents the community and what we want to have as a wonderful space in our city.
Thanks, Kara.
Great. So I am going to kick us off into our breakout rooms. My name is Stacey Chen. I'm from Interface Studio. I think hopefully some of you may recognize my face from some of our previous meetings. So I just want to let you guys know what to expect. We're going to break into 3 smaller groups tonight. Each one will be 20 minutes. And we're going to focus on those 3 topics that you just heard presentations about. And in those rooms, you're going to be able to ask questions either by raising your hand or by using the chat to send us a question if you don't feel comfortable speaking in front of everyone. And we will be monitoring the chat and bringing those questions up for the subject matter experts, both from the city and from our consultant team to answer. In the rooms, we will first address the concerns that we've already been hearing. So some of the things that you just heard about those 3 topic areas, if you have questions about, we'd like to go ahead and address those, and then open it up to new questions and also new ideas regarding those 3 topics. Because we have limited time, I want to make sure everyone knows that, you know, we really want to hear from as many people as we can. So as Drew said, if you've already spoken, please make room for other people to speak. And also please limit your questions to 1 minute so we can include as many as possible. And then finally, you know, we really want to make sure that the ground rules are in everybody's heads. Essentially, it's just about being respectful of everyone's opinions and of each other in this process. And then one last thing, if you do require closed captioning, there is one breakout session that will have live transcription. So please either raise your hand or send a chat to Tobin. You can go into the chat and click on Tobin's name to let him know that you would like to be in the room with the live transcription, and he will place you in that room. And while you do that, and while Tobin gets everybody sorted into their rooms, just a quick reminder of how you can participate. So again, you can either use the chat or you can use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, and the moderator in the room will ask you to unmute and you'll be able to ask your question. If you are calling in by phone right now, you can press *9 in order to raise your hand, and we will read the last 4 digits of your phone number so that you can unmute and ask your question as well. And once again, just a reminder, please limit your question to 1 minute so we can hear from as many people as possible. And don't worry if you don't get a chance to ask your question, you can also contact Drew directly. And also anything that is in the chat will be part of our meeting record. So we will have your questions and comments as well. And so with that, if Tobin is ready, I think we shall meet again in our smaller rooms.
Okay, yes, thanks, Stacy. I believe I have the rooms all set. So in a moment, I will open the rooms and you may receive a prompt to join a room. Just accept OK or click OK, and you should be moved. If you have any trouble, I will be here to help guide you to the right room. Okay, opening the rooms now. Okay, if you are still here, you may need to click join to join the breakout room. You may receive a prompt. And you just have to hit join or accept. Okay, yes, if you're still here, I think there should be some sort of prompt for you to accept, and that will take you to the breakout room. Okay, 1 second here. Let's see. Mm, yeah, let me know if you don't see a prompt. It may be like a little blue button to hit. That will take you to the breakout. Let's see here. Let me try. Let's see. You may receive a prompt now to join room 1. There should be some sort of blue button. There you go. Perfect.
we still waiting for Drew to come back, Tobin?
Everyone should be back here now.
Oh, great. That was kind of fun.
Sorry, just got back. Sorry, I'm running late, everybody.
It's okay.
No, I imagine we've got everyone back in the main room. Thanks, everybody, for entertaining this kind of different format that we did tonight. We really wanted to have the opportunity to have more intimate conversations with folks and be here as a resource for you, which is why we kind of gathered our local institutional brain trust between our city staff members and our consultant team who are bringing different perspectives. You know, we really felt city staff has the most intimate knowledge of city operations and the history of it, and consultants bring a new perspective. They bring outside best practices. They bring now a very deep knowledge of Cambridge after the past 6 months of investigating Cambridge Street. So I felt it was a really balanced approach to these conversations. And I will say, I know they were a little brief. So if folks have follow-up questions, comments, please email me and get in touch with me. Tobin, if you don't mind, also, dropping the mailing list. If you can put that link in the chat. But I just want to say that I'm accessible on the website. My phone number is on there. My email is on there. And we'll also be taking all this conversation into account for our future public meetings. And as we go into the next steps of the process. I'm just going to bring this back to one of the earlier slides in our conversation tonight, which is this project schedule. We're getting through our February meetings here, still integrating a lot of the feedback we heard a couple of weeks ago in the vision session, where people were able to kind of express their aspirations for Cambridge Street and where we can begin to find common ground to work from, because we have so many divergent perspectives on Cambridge Street between advocates for one cause or another, or people that own businesses or longtime residents. Institutions that sit on Cambridge Street. So there's a lot of different voices we are taking into account throughout the process and in the visioning session, and then hearing from you folks tonight too. And I'm hoping we're able to answer some of your burning questions, so to speak. So we have until the end of the summer to wrap up this project, and we'll be doing a lot more engagement opportunities like this. And I think the second half of the process, we're going to powwow with get back together rather with our consultant team, figure out the best next steps forward. So we can be sort of crafting how we want to begin developing recommendations for Cambridge Street, and you all will be part of it every step of the way and more. And we're really hoping, please tell your friends, anyone you know. We want to keep on doing additional outreach to folks that aren't showing up at meetings, so we can really reach populations of people that might not be actively engaged in kind of these city meetings on a regular basis. And part of that is the pandemic, maybe hoping to hit a bit of a subside for us a little bit, so we can get out and have some one-on-one conversations with people, and the weather getting better. But thank you again. Thanks to the consultant team for being here tonight. Thanks to all my fellow colleagues for being here tonight. And I really appreciate everyone tuning in and spending a Thursday evening with us. I hope it was beneficial. And again, feel free to follow up with me anytime. Ashley, I'm not sure if there's anything I missed there or anything we wanted to close out on aside from that.
Nope, that's it. Thanks, everybody. That was really great.
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate your time. I wish we could do this tomorrow night. We can't, but thank you. Okay.
Have a good
So long,
night.
everyone. Thanks very much.